The 4 decades of rock on 106.1 Rock Radio. All this week, the 90s. Grunge gets rid of glam, the boys from Burnage make it big, and the biggest band in the world was the Rolling Stones. Again. Today, the music.
We talked about the 70s and 80s and many of the legendary rock acts, the sort of guys that you see right now in 2010 out there playing big tours, huge world tours. They were very quiet in the 90s, frightened by the very earnest and very worthy men of grunge who made them with their big hair and their, and their big stage shows and their pyrotechnics and perhaps look a bit ridiculous. One band who seemed to completely ignore all of this and carry on regardless and continue to be as massive as they were in the 80s. In fact, even more huge are, of course, U2. How did they do that, Mick?
Wow, that's the $64 million zillion question, isn't it?
U2 songs were always about something, and that's why they were able to survive and, in fact, go on to bigger things in the 90s.
I think that their songs have always been about something, and those are the songs that we will always hold dearest to our hearts. Those are the songs that will attract new audiences as each generation replenishes and a whole new generation of teenagers comes along. So your audience grows exponentially as long as you're still making that quality, cutting-edge kind of music. U2 have always managed to do that, but I think there's also a certain self-awareness which a lot of groups don't have, and an ability to change with the times. I mean, U2, their biggest album of the 80s was The Joshua Tree. I mean, it was just an enormous record, a defining moment, if you like, of rock in the 80s. But immediately after that, they became incredibly uncool. Fun was poked at them. Their next album didn't do as well. They were accused of losing the plot, of being everything that they had always detested, overindulgent, lost in their own fame. And suddenly, by the end of the 80s and the 90s, instead of becoming extremely defiant and in denial about the whole thing, they embraced it and said, you know what, maybe everybody has a point, maybe we need to change. And they did. They changed incredibly. They changed their music, they changed their producer, they changed their image.
We've been experimenting with these kind of sounds and just experimenting full stop since we began our life as a group. In fact, Acting Baby is more heavily treated and more of an industrial record, or more techno, if you like.
Mick, I've got 2 words for you. I'm not sure if it is 2 words. One of them is spelt wrong as well. New metal. Why, Mick?
You know, I always felt, and every pun intended here, I always felt new metal got a bad rap because, for me, it was sadly maligned because I think all the intentions were good. And if you go back a few years to the end of the 80s, for me, the most exciting development in rock music at the end of the 80s was the emergence of groups like Faith No More, Red Hot Chili Peppers. I really liked what Extreme were doing. I thought Extreme were a fantastic band that if you saw them live really had it going on. And they also combined elements of funk into their music. So for me it was an interesting and exciting development. But, you know, by the time you get to, you know, Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park, clearly these are kids that have grown up listening to Faith No More and Red Hot Chili Peppers, and this is what they've done with it. Limp Bizkit, I always felt it was unfortunate that everybody took against the singer so badly that they just couldn't get past that hideous red baseball cap, you know.
I think both sides of music are reviving each other. You know, like hip-hop to another world, to a lot of people who only like rock, are now, that wouldn't listen to hip-hop, are getting hip-hop on their plates, and it's palatable enough for them.
Hey rockers, hip-hoppers, and everybody all around the world.
I'll be one of those few classic rock soldiers, and there are literally a handful of us left, that will actually say, you know what, there was some good stuff done back then. Honestly, trust me, Steve.
New metal, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mick Wall, I'm sure you will, was always way, way bigger in its native North America than it ever was here. Weren't we enjoying what's become known as, and in fact, Manchester's own John Robb reckons that he coined this term, weren't we enjoying Britpop while they were going mad over Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park?
Britpop was kind of our revenge for grunge, really, because I mean, grunge was also an incredibly American phenomenon. We had certain groups over here that tried to pick up the baton and run with it, as it were, but it was never really happening. The big baggy shorts and the flannel shirts just didn't look right on a young lad from Salford, you know. But suddenly Britpop comes along and there's no facial hair, people are looking sharp, and they're recalling probably the greatest era in the history of pop music, which was the earliest exciting era in the 60s. But of course you've got the Beatles, you've got the Kinks, coming along at a time when it really was utterly, the rules hadn't been written and it was just incredibly exciting.
There were bands like, Gene, Gomez, Suede. Not too many. Suede were great. I always thought they wanted to be Roxy Music and got close at times, but the only ones with any sort of staying power, Manchester's own Oasis, although people always accuse them of being inspired by the Beatles, but for me, it was inspired by a very specific era of the Beatles' music and not nearly as progressive as the Beatles, but there you go.
I agree with you. I think the thing about Oasis was they held out enormous promise, because I think it was the Beatles, but I think there was also a little bit of the Stones, a little bit of the Who, a little bit of the Small Faces, a lot of that aggressive attitude which the Beatles didn't necessarily have, a lot of that really defiant pose which got softened in the Beatles, but you didn't see it that way in the Who or the Stones. I thought Oasis, when they came along, were a complete breath of fresh air, totally stood for something entirely different, which is always exciting, and absolutely weren't going to take no for an answer. Where it was a bit of a letdown was by the time you get to the third album, particularly Be Here Now, and from that point onwards, suddenly they didn't progress like the Beatles. There wasn't going to be some tremendous leap forward artistically. I hate to say it to a Manchester lad like yourself, for my money, their main competitors that probably did a little better than them in that department were Blur, of course, who did set out to be more experimental, did try to be more daring, and I think actually after Britpop probably made their best records.
The end of the 90s, when things seem to be unravelling somewhat and people look back for inspiration, people look back at the previous 40 years to hear great music, and the term classic rock starts to be bandied about in these United Kingdom.
We launched Classic Rock magazine in 1998. I say we launched it. They wouldn't let us launch it. They would only let us do one issue. That was going to be it. One issue. It probably won't sell. We'll prove to you that it's a rubbish idea. We'll let you do the one issue, let you get it out of your system, and then we can all forget about it. We did this 184-page issue. It sold about 28,000 copies, which was about 27,000 more than the publishers told us we were going to sell. A couple of months later, we did another one, and a couple of months, and that sold more, and a couple of months, another one. In fact, it was a year and a half before it turned into a proper monthly magazine. We went from, but that Aerosmith and that Led Zeppelin stuff, that's over. That's never coming back, because grunge and Britpop and nu metal have seen it off, mate. You are deluded. You're living in the past. Over the last 10 years, we've gone from that to the largest growth area in the music business. These artists are now selling more albums than ever. It's one of the few areas of the music business that is still actually selling actual CDs as opposed to downloads and MP3s or whatever it is young people do these days. And of course, in the live arena, these guys are selling more tickets than ever.
At the time, it was just Phil Collins and all these boring people and boring bands and who were playing big gigs, but it was like, you know, you got nothing to say. You don't look like rock stars, you look like in tights.
Maybe I don't really want to know how you got in girls, 'cause I just want to fly. Lately, did you ever feel the pain in the morning rain as it soaks you to the bone? Well, maybe I just want to fly, want to live but don't want to die. Maybe I just want